Hi everyone, it's Thomas here from Thomas Fitzgerald Photography, and today I'm going to be looking at processing Fuji RAW files in Skylum's Luminar software. In particular, I'm going to be talking about using the latest version of Luminar, which is Jupiter, I think is the code name, and I've kind of given a brief overview of this version of the software before, so if you want to check out the previous video, I'll have a link in the description below. But for this, I'm going to be concentrating on processing Fuji RAW files. And in particular, what I'm going to do is show you kind of the settings that I use and how to set it up. Now, it's not perfect still. There are still some areas for improvement, and I'm going to discuss those as well. But just dive right in and get started. So I've just kind of collected a few different Fuji RAW files. These are nothing spectacular. I'm just kind of using them as examples. So let me start by opening this one here, which was shot with, it's shot at ISO 200, and it was shot using, I think the 18 to 55 millimeter lens. So I'm just going to drop this onto a Luminar. So the first thing we want to do is kind of set up a workspace. So the default workspace of the default professional workspace has most of the tools you want, but we're going to add a few to that. So okay, so we've opened the file and we haven't done anything else to it yet. So the first thing you want to do is, I'm going to clear this workspace because I have my own setup here, and we're going to go to professional. Okay, so professional has kind of most of what we need in it. So we have raw develop, denoise, saturation, and lots of other stuff. And LUT mapping is down here as well, which we're going to use. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add sharpening to this. So we want sharpening. Okay, and then we're going to drag this back up so that it is just after denoise, because we want to keep all this together. Now you can of course create a simpler version yourself if you don't want all these other filters. So I'm just going to close that. And then the second thing I want to do is move the LUT mapping up here with our sharpening filters as well, sharpening and denoise. Nope, above that. Right, so we want it just after sharpening. So in this version of Luminar, they did add the ability to add color profiles, kind of like what you have in Lightroom, but I haven't been able to find any Fuji specific ones. However, I have found some really good LUTs, so that's why we're going to use those for the film simulation modes rather than the new filters. But I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so the first thing you want to do once you've set this up is save your workspace. So go in here and go save as new workspace, and we'll call this Fuji RAW. And again, you can customize this any way you want. Okay, so that can be your default workspace. And once you've saved that, you can actually set this as default. So go set as default. Okay, so now that we've set up our workspace, the next thing we want to do is kind of come up with like a base level for what we can use, and then we can save that as a preset. So the first thing you want to do is go to the lens tab in the raw develop and turn on all three options. Okay, now here's the thing that's kind of frustrating. At the moment, you can't save this as part of the preset, which is really annoying. And I will write to them and let them know that they need to let that happen. So hopefully in a future version, they'll have that fixed. So once you do that, that will take it from the metadata and apply lens corrections. Now, one of the things I've noticed is it's not 100% perfect. The distortion correction, depending on the lens, isn't 100% perfect. But I will get to that later and show you an example. But for now, I think this is doing pretty good. So the second thing we want to do is we can adjust our sharpening and our noise reduction. So this is shot at ISO 200, so we don't really need to do a lot to this, but we can add some sharpening. So I'm going to zoom in, and when you're adjusting sharpening in Luminar, you need to zoom in, otherwise you're not going to be able to see it. So for sharpening, we can turn this up to, you can actually turn it up quite high, and the results are pretty good. Now the higher you go, obviously this is going to start to look a bit weird, so maybe we'll turn this back down a bit. So we'll say maybe about 30. And the other thing you can do is you can lower the masking. So the masking is kind of a threshold, but it seems to be a soft threshold, so unlike some other software, it's not too bad. You can actually turn it all the way off for certain software, or for certain images. So like low ISO images, ISO 200, you can get away with turning this right off. and you can add maybe just a little bit of noise reduction. So maybe something like a 10. Now this image is probably not the best to begin with, but you're not going to be able to see this in the video anyway, so that is pretty sharp. Problem I have at the moment when I'm recording this is I have the screen resolution scaled down just for recording this, so that the user interface isn't too large, so I'm not seeing it as sharp as it should be, but it is sharp. And again, if you're playing this back on something small in YouTube, you're not going to get to see it properly anyway, but I'm going to zoom in, say to 200%, and you might be able to see this a bit better on the video. Again, it's not, there's nothing wrong with it as far as I can see. It's and I've been quite critical of different raw converters. The only issue I will have is that it doesn't completely eliminate the chromatic aberration the way, say, Lightroom does, but I found that most other software doesn't completely eliminate it anyway. So even, say, Irradiant Developer doesn't do it, and even Capture One doesn't get rid of it completely. You'll often need to use, say, the defringing tools in Lightroom, for example, to get rid of it, because again, it depends on the lens. Some lenses just have a little bit more chromatic aberration than the software will get rid of by default. But it's, again, it's significantly improved over previous versions, and as you can see, it's much faster. Okay, so moving on, the next thing we want to do is apply our LUT so that we have the film simulations. So I'm just going to zoom back out here. Okay, so to get your LUTs, I have done some searching and I have found a website, and it is from, let me just switch over to Safari. It is from a guy called Stuart Sowerby. I'm sorry if I'm massacring your name. And he has created some film simulation profiles. He's actually been doing them for a while now, and he's doing multiple versions of them, but the latest version seems to work really well. So I will have, again, the link in the description below, and you want to download the 3DL versions. You can see here it's the second link on the page. Now this may well change by the time you're reading this, and you want the ones that says Affinity, Luminar, etc. And basically you want the LUTs. The other ones are .pngs. So download these. And then once you have downloaded them, you can load them into Luminar. So again, we go back to our LUT mapping. So again, we need to load custom LUT file. If you've already loaded them, they'll show up in the menu here. But anyway, so I originally shot this with Provia, so I'm going to go Provia. And there we go. That has loaded our LUT file. Now, if you find that this is a little too strong, you can actually just lower it, or you can also lower the contrast and adjust the contrast. I actually kind of like that the way it is. It might be a little bit strong, but we'll set that like that. So once you have that set up, that's our base level. So now before we do any other adjustments, what you want to do is save this as a preset. Again, you want to make sure that your denoise and your sharpening aren't too much, because you want this as kind of like a default, and then you can adjust them for individual images. So this is just kind of to get you in the ballpark. So what you do then is save filters preset and give it a name. So we call this, say, Fuji default. Now I've actually done this already, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hit cancel. But yeah, you save that, and now you have your kind of base level for where you can start off with. So that is kind of a base ISO 200 image, and we've set up our preset now that you can now apply to other images. So let me just close this. And I'll switch back to bridge here. So let's take this image, and again I'm just going to drop it onto Luminar. There's other ways you can open it too, and you can use Lightroom, for example, as your asset manager, and hopefully the asset management side of things that they promised a while ago won't be too long coming. I know people keep emailing me and asking me about that. Unfortunately, I have no idea when it's coming or what's happening with it, but hopefully it won't take too long. Okay, so here now we can just apply our preset. So here's the one I saved earlier. Okay, so that's applied our Provia LUT, and it's done the denoise and sharpening. That's actually probably a little too sharp. So this is a slightly higher ISO image, so we can actually increase that a bit. This is ISO 400, but it's actually okay. I don't think I need to. And I can maybe lower the masking here. I might have used slightly different values on this because this is one I created earlier. But that's actually okay to me. And again, the LUT might be a bit much, so we might just scale that back a bit. Now, the one thing, as I said, you can't save the auto corrections as part of the preset. Now, hopefully they will fix that in the future, because it's really annoying at the moment. And again, as I said, I'm going to write to them and let them know that that's the case. Secondly, let me just show you some of the other LUTs in that pack from that website. So here's Classic Chrome. That's probably not the best image to see this on. I'll just bring that up full. Okay. And then here is Velvia. Velvia is a bit strong. Again, this image is probably not the ideal demonstration purposes for this. So let me load another one. I'm going to delete this. We don't need that. Okay, so one other thing to look at is if you're using, say, a high ISO image. So this one was ISO 2500, and it's not hugely high, but it's high enough. And let me just use this as an example. And again, this will show you another kind of limitation here. Okay, so again, if I applied the defaults that I saved earlier. Okay, so again, this is just applying Provia and a little bit of sharpening and a little bit of denoise. So, once again, it's really important to understand that in order to accurately adjust sharpening and denoise, you need to zoom into 100% because it doesn't render it properly otherwise. So this is an ISO 2500 image, and there's very little noise reduction, and the sharpening isn't kind of optimized for this. So you can actually turn this up. The denoise in this is actually very effective. So that to me looks much better as it is. And then we can adjust the masking. So bring this back to the default, say 30. And we can actually try a bit more on the denoise, say maybe 30 here as well. So again, I'm not sure you'll see this particularly well on the video. Oh, again, I keep forgetting to set these. But that is much cleaner. As you can see, like there's almost no noise there now. So again, if I turn off denoise, you can see it's much more dramatic. The only thing I will say is it is kind of losing some of the detail here. So maybe we might tweak that a little bit. Maybe bring it back down to 25. And you can also adjust the boost. I find these values kind of difficult to understand, so I'm not 100% sure how this works perfectly, but actually that's not bad. So again, once you have done that, if you want, you can save a high ISO version of your default, which again, I already have. I've actually made two, so I'm not going to do that now. But again, all you have to do is go hit Save Filters Preset, which is down here on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Okay, and yes, so one of the limitations is it doesn't fully render the denoise and sharpening in the interface. So it's kind of similar to the way Capture One doesn't do that properly either. Capture One kind of half does it, but this doesn't seem to do it at all. So you only really see it when you zoom in, and obviously if you save the image out, you'll see it as well. So there is a way around it. You can force it to render it by creating it on a new layer, and the way to do that is go Layers, Create New Stamped Layer. Now again, there's no reason to do this. This is purely for display, but if you find that you're finding it difficult to judge, then you can do this. But again, like I'm just showing you for the sake of it, because some people will inevitably ask about it, so this is how you do it if you need to. It can be a little slow because it has to render everything. So as you can see, it's now much cleaner because it has actually rendered the noise reduction and sharpening into the image. Just one other thing, one other caveat, I just wanted to point out that the values I'm using here are just kind of estimates at the moment. I'm kind of still working on trying to find the optimal values, and obviously they'll change from image to image, so don't take the values that I'm using here as gospel. You need to play with it and find what works best for you. But again, yeah, so now you can see that that's all been baked into that, so that's now kind of a flattened image. And if you save that, it will save it with the layers, so kind of like a Photoshop file. Anyway, so that's that. I'm going to close this now. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to show you was if you're using files from X-Transformer. So if you've used Fuji X-Transformer, say for Lightroom, and you want to use those files in Luminar, they work perfectly fine. In previous instructions for this, I have recommended that you bake the lens corrections into the file, but because Luminar's now has reasonably decent lens corrections in the software, you don't need to do that anymore, so you can use them as metadata and it will work reasonably well. So let me just take this image for example, and like again we drop this on Luminar. So this is ISO 200 and this was converted with X transformer with no sharpening and no noise reduction. Actually there was a little luminance noise reduction, so it's basically just using X transformers demosaicing. I'm not doing anything else to the image. If you look back through some of my other videos you'll find instructions on that. So again I'm going to use my defaults here. And again, sharpening wise, sharpening is more or less the same. Again, you can turn masking right off here. You don't really need it on an ISO 200 image. If you don't mind a tiny bit of noise in your image, I kind of prefer that. But again, you won't really notice that zoomed out. So that's really all there is to it. There's not really that much of a difference. Again, don't forget to turn these on, which I do all the time. This actually will, I can show you classic chrome a bit better on this image. It works better. So there's classic chrome, as you can see, is much better. And I think there is, yeah, he has acros here as well. So if you want to do acros, there you go. That to me looks a little bit more contrasty than acros would normally be. So you might need to lower the contrast a bit on the LUT map. But again, it's kind of to your own satisfaction. But yeah, that's absolutely perfect. And say for example, you want to add grain and kind of make this film looking. That's a new term, film looking. All you need to do is to add grain. Grain in this is actually pretty good. It's quite similar to Lightroom's grain, so maybe bring the amount up, the size a little bit. And again, to see this properly, you'll need to zoom in. But that is quite film-like to my eyes. Might be a bit big. Just reduce the size of that a little. And you can add something like, say, the Orton effect and the matte look filter. So the Orton effect just kind of gives you kind of that filmy glow, and then the matte look filter brings up the kind of, gives you that kind of raised blacks that you get with film. So there's our before and after. So again, that's just another example. So again, you could save all this as a preset if you want, and then you have your acros film preset all ready to go. In fact, let me just do that. Okay, so I'm going to look at one more image. Okay, so this image I'm going to show you one of the other small problems that I've discovered. So again, let me just open this. By the way, I'm dragging and dropping here. You don't need to do that. You can also right click on it and go open with, and then just pick Luminar. For some reason I have two versions of this installed, so I'm just going to drag and drop. Somebody made the point to me too that Luminar doesn't open multiple files. Absolutely does. As you can see, I've opened two files here now. So here's the one I had a minute ago, and here's this one. It doesn't use tabs, unfortunately. It used to use tabs and then they changed it, so I'm not quite sure why. Okay, so this is an ISO 5000 image and it is quite noisy. But one of the things I want to show you here is, if you look at the top of this, you can see this is bowed. Now this was using the 18 to 55mm lens. So if I go over here and turn on lens distortion, you can see it corrects it a little bit, but it's not completely correct. There's still a bit of distortion going on here. And I noticed that if I go back to bridge and if I view this, so this is the original version, and as you can see, that is perfectly straight and the verticals are perfectly straight. So if I go back to Luminar, they're not perfectly straight. So you can use the lens distortion to fix this. Now again, this is something they need to look at because that's not right. The lens distortion should correct this perfectly. There's no reason for that. So if anyone from Scalum is watching, fix it please. Okay, so again, this is quite noisy because it's high ISO, and I haven't even put the LUT mapping on this yet. So let me go with, say, classic chrome for this. Okay, so again, the contrast is quite high on some of these, so you'll need to lower them. Again, we need to raise our ISO and sharpening. So if I have a high ISO default I saved earlier, so this uses kind of 30 luminance noise reduction. And as you can see, that's getting rid of quite a lot of it. And also bringing up the masking amount will stop you sharpening the noise. So again, that is much better. And that's pretty good for an ISO 5000 file. However, I find that if I go back here and if I bring up the shadows, you can see there's still quite a lot of noise. Now bear in mind, this is to be expected. There would be noise in this file anyway, especially bringing it up that much. But actually the quality is not bad. The denoise is very good in Luminar. But again, if I zoom back out, I'm not seeing it. So that's kind of partially the problem. And I need to fix this again because the preset, which doesn't save the auto corrections, does save the manual corrections, which is really annoying. And even if they're set to 0, it'll save them. Okay, so again, part of the problem here is it's not previewing noise reduction when you're zoomed out. So in order to see it, you can either render the file out, or you can do what I said earlier and create a new stamped layer. Again, this is not an ideal situation. I like Luminar a lot, but I am fully aware that it has its limitations. Some people seem to vent their frustration with me online over the limitations of Luminar. I don't work for the company, I'm afraid. I share your frustrations at certain things with it. So, but now you can see, so that is it rendered. And it can be a little splotchy in some of the areas. So unfortunately there is that. But we're pushing it to fairly extremes here, in my opinion, because not only have we're using a very high ISO file, but we're also raising it a bit. Whether you would get better results in Lightroom or not, you probably might, because Lightroom's noise reduction is very good. But I found, like, when I processed these files originally, I was having difficulties with them. So, but anyway, yeah, it's something that you may need to play around with and to kind of get the settings yourself. As I said, it's not perfect, and I don't mean to say that it is in any way. So, but it's definitely getting there, and in certain situations, I think it does a really nice job. So if I go back to this image for a second and just show you some of the other presets that I've made here. And some of these are using different LUTs from different sources. So this is one I made by creating a LUT from a Kodak preset in Lightroom, and it actually gives you quite a nice look as well. So, but yeah, so let me close that and we'll do one more image, and we don't need that. Okay, so let's take this image just to see how it looks. Okay, so this was done with X Transformer as well. So I'm going to start with our defaults. Okay, and again, that is a little strong, so just going to bring that down a bit. And go over to our lens and turn all these options on. And I'm just going to check this against the original. Yeah, I mean, in that case, it's fine. It's only in certain circumstances and in certain lenses that it's a bit of an issue. So again, let me just zoom in here. Sharpness and everything looks fine. I'm actually just going to, I don't think we need any masking on this. Okay, so that's all fine. And now let's just kind of do some additional adjustments to this, just so we'll do a full image here. I want to bring down the highlights a bit, maybe bring up the shadows, and we will increase accent AI a bit, and maybe a bit of mid-tone contrast, and bring up this guy with the polarizing filter. You don't want to go too far in that because that actually goes a bit mad. Maybe a bit of a vignette. Okay, and then we'll add a few more. So we'll add our Orton effect filter. See, one of the things too about the LUT mapping filter is because we're using it at the start kind of as a color profile, you can actually add multiple ones. So I can add another one here, and I can say, let me just try using, so I could use one of the ones that comes with it. So if you want kind of like a filmy effect, and then we can just kind of blend that out. So then there's before and after. Okay, so I mean, that's not a brilliant example, but it just kind of shows you what you can do kind of processing an image from start to finish, and the whole thing is fairly responsive now. So again, it's certainly usable. I might try and do a full project on it at some point. The biggest issues for me still are obviously that the chromatic aberration isn't 100% perfect. The lack of previewing at full screen is kind of annoying. But the big problem is still getting files back out of it, because you have to save them and then export them. So that's kind of a little tricky. I had came up with this idea that you could just save all the files and then batch process the saved Luminar files, but it won't let you do that. It'll only batch process actual normal images like JPEGs or TIFFs, at least in my experience. So unless I'm doing something wrong, which is not beyond the realms of possibility. But anyway, I know this has been kind of a long tutorial, but hopefully that will show you how to go about processing Fuji RAW files in Luminar. And obviously this will work for any kind of RAW file. I might do a version specifically for Sony files later on. But yeah, so if you haven't seen it already, check out my Fuji X-Trans guides on my website. I will have a link in the description below. And if you like this video and want to see more of this kind of thing, then you can help by supporting me on Patreon. Again, link in the description below. And please like and share and subscribe. Okay, so thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos, and check out some of the other videos on my channel. Okay, thanks a million.